The church bells of Promise Creek, Arizona Territory, fell silent as the last of the townsfolk shuffled out with sympathetic glances and whispered condolences. Charlotte Vaughn stood alone at the altar in her cream-colored wedding dress, the delicate lace veil still draped over her face as she stared at the church doors. 3 hours had passed since Philip Westwood was meant to appear and make her his wife, and with each minute that ticked by on the old church clock, the truth had settled deeper into her heart. He wasn't coming. The year was 1876, and at 22 years old, Charlotte had just become the latest cautionary tale in Promise Creek. Behind her fan-shaped bouquet of wilting desert wildflowers, her hands trembled. The sanctuary that had been filled with excited whispers and anticipation now felt cavernous, the emptiness closing in around her. "Miss Charlotte," Pastor Miller's voice was gentle as he approached her from behind. "Perhaps it would be best if you returned home now. I fear Mr. Westwood has made his intentions quite clear by his absence." Charlotte couldn't bring herself to speak. Home. The small room above the millinery shop where she worked. The room she'd spent weeks packing up, believing she would be moving into Philip's handsome house on the edge of town by nightfall. The sound of spurs jingling against wooden floorboards drew Charlotte's attention to the back of the church. A tall figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the harsh desert sun. He stepped inside, and as the door closed behind him, his features became visible, a man she'd seen around town but never properly met. Nathan Xavier, the quiet cowboy who worked at the Triple R ranch outside town. His dark hair fell in unruly waves beneath his Stetson, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. Dust from the trail coated his clothes, suggesting he'd ridden hard to get here. His eyes, a striking blue that reminded Charlotte of summer skies, locked with hers. "Miss Vaughn," he said, his voice deeper than she expected. He removed his hat and held it against his chest as he walked down the aisle toward her, not as a groom might, but with purpose nonetheless. When he reached her, he stopped several feet away, respectful of propriety even in this unusual circumstance. "Mr. Xavier," she replied automatically, recognizing him from the few times she'd seen him buying supplies in town. "I'm afraid you've arrived too late for the wedding." She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I reckon there wasn't much of a wedding to attend," he said, his gaze steady. Words already spread that Westwood took the morning stage to Tucson. Charlotte flinched. So it was true, Philip hadn't just been delayed, he'd fled. "Miss Vaughn, I don't mean to overstep, but I believe you deserve better than standing here awaiting a man who's shown his true character." Nathan's expression softened. "You'll walk away with me if you'd like. Not as anything improper, mind you. Just a ride home, away from the stairs that'll be waiting when you step outside alone." Charlotte looked down at her bouquet, then at the church doors where she knew curious onlookers would be gathered, eager to witness her humiliation firsthand. In a town as small as Promise Creek, news traveled faster than a prairie fire, and she couldn't bear the thought of their pity. "Why would you help me, Mr. Xavier? We're hardly acquaintances." Something flashed in his eyes, perhaps anger, but not directed at her. "Because no one deserves to be abandoned on what should be the happiest day of their life. And because I've watched Westwood swagger around town long enough to know you're fortunate he showed his true colors before you took vows before God." Charlotte considered his offer. The idea of walking through town in her wedding dress, alone and abandoned, made her stomach twist. But leaving with a man she barely knew carried its own risks to her already damaged reputation. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Xavier, but I cannot simply—" "Charlotte," Pastor Miller interjected gently. "Perhaps Mr. Xavier's suggestion has merit. You need not face the town gossips today. Your aunt would understand." Charlotte thought of her Aunt Margaret, her only family, who had taken ill just days ago and couldn't attend the wedding. The thought of explaining everything to her aunt while fending off the town's stares was unbearable. She looked back at Nathan Xavier, searching his face for any sign of ulterior motives but finding only genuine concern. "Very well, Mr. Xavier," she finally said, lifting her chin despite the weight of her disappointment. "I would be grateful for your escort." Nathan nodded once, then turned to the pastor. "Is there a back way out?" Pastor Miller pointed to a small door near the pulpit that led to the garden behind the church. "Through there. It will take you behind the buildings all the way to Pine Street." "Thank you, Pastor," Charlotte said quietly. "And thank you for everything today." The older man patted her hand. "God works in mysterious ways, my dear. Perhaps this, painful as it is a blessing in disguise." Charlotte couldn't imagine how being left at the altar could possibly be a blessing, but she nodded politely before gathering her skirts and following Nathan toward the side door. Once outside, the June heat hit her immediately, the sun beating down on her wedding attire that suddenly felt as suffocating as her circumstances. They walked in silence through the garden and into the narrow alley behind the church. "My horse is tied at the general store," Nathan said, keeping a respectful distance between them. "We can cut through here and avoid Main Street altogether." Charlotte nodded, grateful for his consideration. As they walked, she became acutely aware of how ridiculous she must look, a bride in full wedding attire shuffling through back alleys with a cowboy she barely knew. "Mr. Xavier," she said suddenly, stopping in her tracks, "I cannot go home like this. Everyone will see, and I cannot bear it." Nathan studied her for a moment, then shrugged off his long duster coat. "It's not the cleanest, but it'll cover most of your dress." He held it out, and Charlotte hesitated only briefly before accepting it. The coat smelled of leather, horses, and the open prairie, nothing like Philip's cologne that always seemed too strong, too artificial. She wrapped it around herself, grateful that Nathan was tall enough that the coat covered most of her wedding dress. "Thank you," she said softly. They continued through the alley until they reached the general store, where a handsome buckskin gelding stood hitched to the post, swishing its tail against flies in the afternoon heat. "This is Rusty," Nathan said, patting the horse's neck. "He's gentle but strong. Do you ride, Miss Vaughn?" "I do, though it's been some time," she admitted. Nathan nodded, then to her surprise removed his bandana and offered it to her. "For your veil," he explained. "Might be easier to tie it back than remove it altogether." Charlotte touched the delicate lace that still hung over her face. She'd almost forgotten it was there. With trembling fingers, she unpinned the veil and folded it carefully, using Nathan's bandana to wrap it before tucking it into the pocket of his coat. "Where would you like me to take you, Miss Vaughn? Your home, or perhaps your aunt's place?" Charlotte considered her options. Her room above the millinery would offer privacy, but it also meant facing Mrs. Bishop, the shop owner who had been overly excited about Charlotte's marriage to one of Promise Creek's most eligible bachelors. "My aunt's house," she decided. "It's on the edge of town, past the blacksmith's." Nathan nodded, untying Rusty from the hitching post. "I know it. Old Simmons' place with the blue shutters." "Yes, Aunt Margaret bought it after Mr. Simmons passed last winter." Nathan checked his saddle straps, then turned to Charlotte. "I'll help you up if that's all right." Charlotte nodded, and with surprising gentleness for a man of his size, Nathan lifted her onto Rusty's back. The side saddle position was awkward with her wedding dress, but she managed to arrange herself with some semblance of dignity. Nathan swung up behind her, keeping a respectful distance between them despite the constraints of the saddle. "Hold on to the horn," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. As they rode through the back streets of Promise Creek, Charlotte was grateful for Nathan's foresight in avoiding Main Street. Even so, they passed several people who stared openly at the unusual sight: Charlotte Vaughn in a wedding dress covered by a man's coat, riding with Nathan Xavier on his horse. "People will talk," Charlotte murmured, more to herself than to Nathan. "People always talk," he replied, his voice rumbling close to her ear. Best not to give them any more fuel than necessary. When they reached Aunt Margaret's modest house, Charlotte felt a wave of relief wash over her. At least here, she could collapse in private and try to make sense of her shattered plans. Nathan dismounted first, then helped Charlotte down with the same careful respect he'd shown at the church. Up close, she noticed a scar that ran along his jawline, partially hidden by his stubble. She wondered briefly how he'd gotten it, then chided herself for the inappropriate thought. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Xavier," she said, beginning to remove his coat. "Keep it for now," he said, holding up a hand. "You can return it another time." Before Charlotte could respond, the front door opened and her aunt appeared, leaning heavily on a cane. Margaret Vaughn was a handsome woman in her 50s whose recent bout of influenza had left her weaker than usual, but had done nothing to diminish the sharpness of her gaze. "Charlotte." Her aunt called, confusion evident in her voice. "What on earth? I thought you'd be at your wedding reception by now." Charlotte felt her composure begin to crack. The reality of what had happened, of Philip's betrayal, and her public humiliation came crashing down on her. "Aunt Margaret, there wasn't any wedding, madam," Nathan said, stepping slightly forward. "Mr. Westwood didn't show." Margaret's expression shifted from confusion to fury in an instant. "That good for nothing," she broke off, noticing Charlotte's distress. "Come inside, child." "Both of you," she added, nodding to Nathan. "I shouldn't impose," Nathan began, but Margaret waved away his protest. "Nonsense. You've brought my niece home safely. The least I can offer is a cup of coffee and a proper thank you." Charlotte couldn't summon the energy to argue. The emotional toll of the day was catching up to her, and the thought of being alone with her thoughts was suddenly terrifying. She nodded gratefully to Nathan, who, after a moment's hesitation, tied Rusty to the porch rail and followed the women inside. The interior of Margaret's home was modestly furnished but comfortable. Handmade quilts adorned the backs of chairs, and pressed wildflowers framed in simple wood hung on the walls, Charlotte's contributions to making her aunt's house feel like home. "Sit, both of you," Margaret instructed, moving toward the kitchen with surprising speed for someone recovering from illness. "I'll put the kettle on." "Let me help you, Aunt," Charlotte said, grateful for something to do. In the kitchen, Margaret turned to her niece, her voice low. "Tell me everything." Charlotte removed Nathan's coat and hung it carefully over a chair before gathering cups and saucers from the cupboard. "There's not much to tell. Philip never came. I waited for 3 hours before accepting the truth." Her voice was steadier than she expected. "Pastor Miller was kind, but everyone else. The pity in their eyes was unbearable." Margaret's lips thinned to a hard line. "And Mr. Xavier, how does he fit into this?" He arrived at the church after everyone else had gone. "He offered to escort me home away from the stairs." Charlotte placed the cups on a tray, avoiding her aunt's penetrating gaze. "I didn't know what else to do." Margaret's expression softened. "He seems a decent sort, not like that preening peacock you were set to marry." "Aunt Margaret, Philip was a man who left you at the altar, Charlotte. Whatever his reasons, his actions speak to his character." Margaret touched her niece's shoulder gently. "You're better off without him, though I know that's cold comfort today." Charlotte felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. "I don't understand why. Everything was planned." "He seemed happy, excited even." She paused, remembering something. "Mr. Xavier mentioned Philip took the morning stage to Tucson." Margaret's eyebrows rose. Did he indeed, without so much as a note? None that I received, Charlotte confirmed, the hurt in her chest sharpening. Well, Margaret said, her voice taking on a practical tone that Charlotte recognized as her way of dealing with difficult situations. What's done is done. We'll manage this together as we always have. She picked up the tray. Now, let's not keep Mr. Xavier waiting. In the sitting room, they found Nathan standing by the window, hat in hand, looking somewhat out of place among the feminine touches of the house. He turned when they entered, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Vaughn," he said as Margaret set down the tray. "But I should be heading back to the ranch soon." "Sit for a moment at least," Margaret insisted. "My niece tells me you rescued her from a most uncomfortable situation." Nathan's cheeks colored slightly. "I didn't do much, madam, just offered a ride." "You offered kindness when it was most needed," Margaret corrected, pouring coffee into 3 cups. "That's not nothing, young man." Charlotte sat quietly, her wedding dress crinkling around her. She felt ridiculous still wearing it but couldn't bring herself to change just yet. It felt like admitting defeat somehow. "Have you worked at the Triple R long, Mr. Xavier?" Margaret asked, passing him a cup. "5 years now, madam. Came west from Missouri after the war." Charlotte looked up with interest. "You fought in the war between the states?" Nathan nodded, his expression guarded. "Yes, madam. Union side. I was young but old enough to serve the last 2 years." An awkward silence fell, as it often did when the war was mentioned. Even 11 years after its end, the wounds remained raw for many. "And your people?" Margaret asked. "Are they still in Missouri?" "No, madam. Lost my pa in the war. Ma passed from fever a few years after. Got a brother somewhere in California, last I heard." Nathan sipped his coffee, clearly uncomfortable with the personal questions. Charlotte felt a pang of sympathy. She knew what it was to be without parents, having lost her own to cholera when she was 16. "I'm sorry for your losses, Mr. Xavier," she said softly. Nathan met her eyes briefly before looking away. "Life out here is hard. We all carry our burdens." Margaret, sensing the shift in mood, changed the subject. "How are things at the Triple R? I hear Mr. Rutherford is considering selling some of his northern pastures." As Nathan answered, Charlotte found herself studying him more carefully. There was a quiet strength to him that she hadn't noticed before, a steadiness that contrasted sharply with Philip's flashy charm. While Philip had always been quick with compliments and grand gestures, there was something compelling about Nathan's straightforward manner. The conversation continued for another half-hour before Nathan finally stood to leave. "I appreciate the coffee and company, but I've got duties back at the ranch." "Of course," Margaret said. "Charlotte, see Mr. Xavier out while I clear these cups." Charlotte rose, conscious of her wedding dress rustling as she led Nathan to the door. On the porch, she turned to face him, suddenly unsure what to say. "Thank you again, Mr. Xavier. I don't know how I would have faced everyone without your help." Nathan settled his hat back on his head. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Miss Vaughn. You'd have managed, perhaps," she conceded, "but I'm grateful I didn't have to find out." She paused, remembering his coat. "I should return your keep it for now," he said again. "I have others." Charlotte nodded, then impulsively held out her hand. "I hope we might meet again under better circumstances, Mr. Xavier." Nathan looked surprised but took her offered hand. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work, but his touch was gentle. "I hope so too, Miss Vaughn." As he mounted Rusty and rode away, Charlotte remained on the porch, watching until he disappeared from view. The day that had begun with such hope and ended in humiliation had taken yet another unexpected turn. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time since standing alone at that altar, she felt a small flicker of something that might, in time, become hope. Inside, her aunt was waiting with a practical gleam in her eye. A good man, that one. Not full of himself like some I could name. Aunt Margaret, I've only just been jilted. I'm hardly looking for another man's attention. Margaret shrugged, her expression knowing. Of course not, dear. Now let's get you out of that dress. Tomorrow is another day and we've much to figure out. Charlotte followed her aunt upstairs, her mind a tangle of emotions. Shame and hurt still dominated, but somewhere beneath them, a seed of curiosity had been planted about the quiet cowboy with kind eyes who had appeared when she needed someone most. The news of Charlotte's abandoned wedding spread through Promise Creek like wildfire, each retelling more embellished than the last. By Monday morning, as Charlotte steeled herself to return to work at the millinery, the story had taken on mythic proportions. "You're sure you're ready for this?" Aunt Margaret asked, adjusting Charlotte's bonnet as they stood in the kitchen. "Mrs. Bishop would understand if you needed another day." "I can't hide forever," Charlotte replied, though her stomach clenched at the thought of facing the town's gossip. "Besides, I need the work now more than ever." With her marriage to Philip, Charlotte would have become the wife of a successful businessman with a fine house and plenty of money. Now she was back to being a shop girl with uncertain prospects and a tarnished reputation. "Keep your chin up," Margaret advised, patting Charlotte's cheek. "This too shall pass." The walk to Main Street felt interminable. Charlotte could feel eyes on her from every porch and storefront, could hear the whispers that stopped abruptly when she drew near. She maintained her posture and kept her gaze forward, determined not to show how deeply their scrutiny wounded her. Mrs. Bishop, a plump widow with permanently rouged cheeks, was arranging a display of ribbons when Charlotte entered the shop. The bell above the door announced her arrival, and Mrs. Bishop turned with a sympathetic expression that made Charlotte want to flee. "Oh, my dear girl," the older woman exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace Charlotte. "Such a terrible business. Everyone's talking about it. Poor little thing left standing there in your beautiful dress." Charlotte extricated herself from Mrs. Bishop's powdery embrace. "I'd prefer not to discuss it if you don't mind. I'm here to work." Mrs. Bishop looked disappointed at being denied the first-hand account she clearly craved but nodded. "Of course, dear. I'm sure it's all too painful. Though I must say, Mr. Westwood's behavior was most shocking. So unlike him." Charlotte bit her tongue to keep from defending Philip out of habit. The truth was, she had no idea what had driven him to abandon her. The Philip she thought she knew would never have humiliated her so publicly. "There's a new shipment of felt that needs to be unboxed and sorted," Mrs. Bishop continued, gesturing to several crates near the back room. "And Mrs. Hollister is coming at 10 o'clock for a fitting of her new hat." Charlotte nodded gratefully, glad for tasks to occupy her hands and mind. "I'll see to it right away." The morning passed in a blur of activity. Charlotte threw herself into her work with unusual vigor, taking on every task Mrs. Bishop assigned and volunteering for more. Anything to keep moving, to prevent her thoughts from circling back to that empty church and her shattered dreams. Several customers came and went, each one finding some excuse to linger longer than necessary, their eyes filled with curiosity. Charlotte weathered their not-so-subtle inquiries with as much grace as she could muster, deflecting questions with polite but firm responses. Just before noon, the bell above the door chimed again. Charlotte was in the back room and heard Mrs. Bishop's voice rise with interest. "Mr. Xavier, what a surprise to see you in my humble shop. Are you looking for something special?" Charlotte froze, a bolt of ribbon clutched in her hands. She hadn't expected to see Nathan again so soon, if at all. What could have brought him to a millinery shop? "Good morning, Mrs. Bishop," Nathan's deep voice replied. "I'm actually hoping to speak with Miss Vaughn if she's available." Charlotte's heart jumped to her throat. She smoothed her apron and checked her reflection in the small mirror hanging on the wall. Her cheeks were flushed from work, and a few strands of auburn hair had escaped her practical bun. She tucked them back as best she could before stepping into the main shop. Nathan stood near the door, hat in hand, looking even more out of place among the feminine frippery of the millinery than he had in Aunt Margaret's sitting room. His eyes found hers immediately, and something in his gaze made Charlotte's pulse quicken. "Miss Vaughn," he said, inclining his head in greeting. "Mr. Xavier. This is unexpected." Mrs. Bishop looked between them with undisguised interest, clearly connecting Nathan to the rumors about Charlotte's ride home from the church. "I've come to return something of yours," Nathan said, reaching into his vest pocket. He produced a small item wrapped in cloth and held it out to Charlotte. "Found it caught in Rusty's saddle when I was tending to him last night." Charlotte stepped forward and accepted the package, unwrapping it carefully. Inside was her mother's pearl hairpin, the something old she had worn tucked into her wedding veil. In the chaos of Saturday's events, she hadn't even noticed it was missing. "Oh," she breathed, clutching the precious heirloom. "I thought it was lost. Thank you, Mr. Xavier." Nathan nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Figured it might be important to you." Mrs. Bishop, never one to miss an opportunity for information, inserted herself into the conversation. "How thoughtful of you, Mr. Xavier. We've all been so concerned for our dear Charlotte after Saturday's unfortunate events." Charlotte felt her face heat with embarrassment, but Nathan's response surprised her. "Miss Vaughn has shown remarkable grace in a difficult situation," he said firmly. "Anyone with sense would admire her strength rather than gossip about her misfortune." Mrs. Bishop's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Well, I never meant to imply that. Is to say, of course, we all admire Charlotte tremendously." Nathan's gaze never left Charlotte's face. "Miss Vaughn, I was also wondering if you might allow me to call on you properly sometime. Perhaps this Sunday after church." The question hung in the air, unexpected and startling. Charlotte was aware of Mrs. Bishop's gasp beside her, could practically feel the woman's excitement at being witness to such a scene. "Mr. Xavier." Charlotte hesitated, unsure how to respond. She had only just been abandoned by the man she thought she loved. The idea of entertaining another suitor so quickly felt wrong somehow. And yet, there was something about Nathan Xavier that intrigued her, something that had nothing to do with gratitude for his kindness. "I understand if it's too soon," he said quietly, saving her from having to answer. "The offer stands whenever you're ready." Relief washed over Charlotte. "Thank you for understanding," she said softly. Then, making a decision that surprised even herself, she added, "Perhaps we might start with a walk after services. Nothing formal, just as friends." Nathan's smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines and bringing a warmth to his eyes that made Charlotte's breath catch. "I'd like that very much, Miss Vaughn." Mrs. Bishop, unable to contain herself any longer, clapped her hands together. "How lovely." "What a story this will make, Mrs. Bishop," Charlotte interrupted firmly. "I believe Mrs. Hollister's hat needs another feather. Would you mind selecting something appropriate while I see Mr. Xavier out?" The older woman looked disappointed but nodded, casting one last curious glance between them before bustling off to the feather display. Charlotte walked Nathan to the door, grateful for the momentary privacy. "Thank you for returning my mother's hairpin. It means more to me than I can express." "I'm glad I found it," Nathan said. He paused, then added, "I hope I didn't overstep by asking to call on you. I know the timing is unusual." Charlotte considered his words. "It is unusual," she acknowledged. "And I don't know what I'm feeling right now, except that everything I thought was certain has vanished." She looked up at him, studying the earnest expression on his face. "But I would welcome your friendship, Mr. Xavier. The rest, we'll have to see." Nathan nodded, accepting her terms without protest. "Sunday, then, after services." "Sunday," she confirmed. As Nathan left the shop, Charlotte found herself watching him through the window as he crossed the street to the general store. There was a steadiness to his gait, a confidence that came not from arrogance but from knowing himself. It was so different from Philip's calculated charm. "Well," Mrs. Bishop exclaimed, appearing at Charlotte's elbow. "Nathan Xavier, I never would have thought it. So quiet, that one. Keeps to himself mostly. But they do say he's Mr. Rutherford's most trusted hand at the Triple R." Charlotte turned away from the window. "We're merely acquaintances, Mrs. Bishop. He was kind to me on Saturday, that's all." Hum," Mrs. Bishop hummed, clearly unconvinced. "Men don't ride all the way into town on their day off just to return a hairpin, dear. Not unless there's something more to it." Charlotte couldn't deny the logic in Mrs. Bishop's observation, but she wasn't ready to examine what that something more might be. Instead, she returned to the back room and her work, trying to ignore the small flutter of anticipation she felt when she thought of Sunday. The rest of the week passed slowly for Charlotte. Each day at the millinery brought a new wave of curious customers, though the intensity of their interest began to wane as the days passed. By Friday, Mrs. Bishop reported with some disappointment that there was new gossip circulating about the banker's wife and a mysterious letter, shifting some of the attention away from Charlotte's dramatic non-wedding. At home, Charlotte found herself wondering about Nathan more often than she cared to admit. What had driven him to offer help that day at the church? Why had he asked to call on her when she was so clearly not in a position to consider courtship? And why did the thought of seeing him again fill her with a nervous energy that was both unsettling and strangely pleasant? Sunday morning dawned clear and warm. Charlotte dressed with particular care, choosing a blue calico dress that Aunt Margaret said brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned her hair up simply, deliberately avoiding the elaborate style she had worn for her wedding. "You look lovely," Aunt Margaret said as they prepared to leave for church. Her eyes held a knowing gleam that Charlotte pretended not to notice. "It's just church, Aunt Margaret, the same as every Sunday." Hum," Margaret hummed in a tone that sounded suspiciously like Mrs. Bishop's. "And I suppose it has nothing to do with a certain tall cowboy who might be in attendance." Charlotte felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Xavier and I are merely acquaintances. So you've said, repeatedly." Margaret adjusted her shawl with a smile. "Well, shall we go?" "Wouldn't want to be late for the service." The walk to church felt different today. Charlotte was acutely aware of the eyes that followed her, but for the first time since the wedding disaster, she didn't feel crushed by their weight. Whether it was the passing of time or the prospect of seeing Nathan, she couldn't say, but she found herself holding her head a little higher as they approached the white clapboard church. Pastor Miller greeted them at the door with a warm smile. "Miss Vaughn, Mrs. Vaughn. Lovely to see you both this morning." "Thank you, Pastor," Charlotte replied, grateful for his kindness. Unlike some in town, he had never made her feel that her abandoned wedding was a source of entertainment. Inside, Charlotte and Margaret took their usual pew near the middle of the church. Charlotte couldn't help scanning the congregation for a glimpse of Nathan, but there was no sign of him yet. She tried to ignore the disappointment that settled in her chest. The church filled quickly. Charlotte kept her gaze forward, though she could feel the occasional glance directed her way. Just as Pastor Miller was about to begin the service, the door at the back opened, and Nathan slipped in quietly. He was dressed in clean clothes, his hair damp and combed back from his face. His eyes found Charlotte immediately, and he gave her a small nod before taking a seat in the last pew. Throughout the service, Charlotte found her attention wandering. Pastor Miller's sermon on forgiveness seemed pointed, though whether it was meant for her or the congregation who had been so eager to gossip, she couldn't be sure. When the service ended, Charlotte and Margaret made their way slowly through the crowd toward the door. Several people stopped them to exchange pleasantries, and Charlotte noticed that while curiosity still lingered in some eyes, the naked pity that had been so prevalent earlier in the week had largely faded. Outside, Nathan was waiting at the bottom of the steps, hat in hand. Several people glanced between him and Charlotte with renewed interest, and Charlotte could practically hear the whispers starting. "Miss Vaughn," Nathan said as she approached. "Mrs. Vaughn." He nodded respectfully to Margaret. "Mr. Xavier," Margaret replied with a smile. "Lovely sermon today, wasn't it?" "Yes, madam. Particularly thoughtful." An awkward silence fell, and Charlotte realized that despite her agreement to walk with Nathan, she hadn't considered the logistics or what they might actually talk about. Margaret, sensing the tension, came to her rescue. "Charlotte, why don't you and Mr. Xavier take that walk now? I'll head home and start Sunday dinner. Mr. Xavier, you're welcome to join us afterward if you'd like." Nathan looked to Charlotte, clearly waiting for her to confirm the invitation. "That's very kind, Mrs. Vaughn." "I'd be honored if Miss Vaughn is agreeable." All eyes were on Charlotte now, including those of several church members who had slowed their departures to witness the exchange. "Yes, that would be lovely," Charlotte said, finding her voice. "Shall we walk toward the creek, Mr. Xavier?" "It's quite pleasant this time of year." Nathan offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Charlotte placed her hand lightly upon it. The gesture was formal, proper, but she could feel the solid strength beneath her fingers. As they walked away from the church, Charlotte was acutely aware of the stares following them, but she kept her gaze forward, chin high. They walked in silence for several minutes, following the well-worn path that led from the church toward Promise Creek itself, the small waterway that had given the town its name. Only when they were well away from curious eyes did Nathan speak. "I wasn't sure you'd still want to walk with me," he admitted. "Figured you might have second thoughts once you'd had time to consider." Charlotte glanced up at him, surprised by his candor. "I considered it," she acknowledged, "but I find I'm curious about you, Mr. Xavier. You've shown me kindness without asking for anything in return. That's unusual in my experience." Nathan's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "Not where I come from. Where I was raised, you help folks because it's right, not because you expect something back." "Missouri, you said," Nathan nodded. "Small farming town, nothing special but good people mostly." "And what brought you west?" Charlotte asked, genuinely interested. "The war, partly," Nathan admitted. "Saw too much during those years, needed open spaces and fewer reminders." He paused. "Plus, my brother headed this way right after the surrender. I followed a few years later thinking to find him. But you said you haven't seen him." "No, tracked him as far as California, but the trail went cold." There was a deep sadness in Nathan's voice that he tried to mask. "One day, maybe." They reached the creek, where a few old cottonwoods provided shade from the strengthening sun. Charlotte released Nathan's arm and moved to sit on a flat rock near the water's edge. After a moment's hesitation, Nathan settled beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "What about you?" he asked. "You're not from Promise Creek originally, are you?" Charlotte shook her head. "No. Aunt Margaret and I came from St. Louis 3 years ago after my parents died. Aunt Margaret had inherited some money from her late husband and wanted a fresh start. I was happy to come along." "And that's when you met Westwood?" Nathan's voice was careful, neutral. Charlotte tensed at the mention of Philip but forced herself to answer. "Yes, he owns the mercantile where Aunt Margaret bought supplies for our new home. He was charming." The word felt hollow now. We began courting about a year ago. Nathan nodded but didn't press for more details, for which Charlotte was grateful. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "Mr. Xavier," Charlotte said eventually, "may I ask you something directly?" "Of course. Why did you ask to call on me? The truth, please." Nathan considered her question, his gaze on the creek. "The truth is, I've noticed you around town for some time," he admitted. "Not in any forward way, just noticed. You always seemed kind, even to folks others in town looked down on." He paused. "When I heard about what happened at the church, I was angry on your behalf. No one deserves that kind of treatment, especially someone who's always shown such grace to others." Charlotte hadn't expected this answer. "You've been watching me," Nathan's cheeks colored slightly. "Not watching exactly, just aware. I don't come into town often, but when I do, I observe more than people think." "And what have you observed about me?" Charlotte wasn't sure why she asked, but something in Nathan's straightforward manner made her bold. "That you're patient with difficult customers at the millinery. That you help old Mrs. Jenkins with her packages even when she's being cantankerous. That you always have a kind word for the Miller children, even when they're running wild." Nathan finally looked at her directly. "That you deserve better than a man who'd leave you waiting at the altar." Charlotte felt her breath catch at the intensity in his gaze. "You've seen all that from a distance, like I said, I observe." A small smile lifted the corner of his mouth. "Ranch work involves a lot of watching and waiting. You learn to pay attention." Charlotte found herself smiling back, the first genuine smile she'd felt in days. "Well, Mr. Xavier, I must say your observations are flattering if somewhat unexpected." "Nathan," he said suddenly. "If we're going to be friends, at least you might call me Nathan. When we're not in company, that is." Charlotte considered the request. It was forward, perhaps, but not improper given the unusual circumstances of their acquaintance. "Very well, Nathan. And you may call me Charlotte in private." Nathan's smile widened, transforming his face in a way that made Charlotte's heart beat a little faster. "Charlotte," he said, as if testing the name on his tongue. "It suits you." They fell into easier conversation after that, speaking of simple things, the changing seasons, the best fishing spots along the creek, the upcoming Founders' Day celebration in town. Nathan proved to be surprisingly well-spoken for a ranch hand, and Charlotte found herself relaxing in his company in a way she hadn't expected. When the church bells rang noon, Charlotte reluctantly stood. "We should head back. Aunt Margaret will be expecting us." Nathan rose as well, offering his arm once more. "Thank you for agreeing to walk with me today. I've enjoyed your company." "As have I," Charlotte admitted, somewhat surprised to find it was true. "More than I anticipated." They walked back toward town, and Charlotte found herself wondering what the coming weeks might bring. The pain of Philip's abandonment was still fresh, but here, walking beside Nathan with the sun warm on her face and the scent of wildflowers in the air, she could almost believe that one day it might fade to a distant memory. Sunday dinner at Margaret's house was a simple affair: roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread, but Nathan ate with obvious appreciation. Charlotte watched him interact with her aunt, noting how respectful he was without being stiff or formal. There was an ease to him that contrasted sharply with Philip's calculated charm. "So, Mr. Xavier," Margaret said as they finished their meal, "Charlotte tells me you've been at the Triple R for 5 years now. Do you enjoy ranch work?" "Yes, madam. It suits me. I like the open air and working with animals." Nathan set down his fork. "Mr. Rutherford's been good to me too. Started me as a regular hand, but I've worked my way up to foreman now." Charlotte looked up in surprise. "Foreman? I didn't realize." Nathan shrugged, seeming almost embarrassed. It's a recent promotion, after old Pete retired last month. Margaret nodded approvingly. That's quite an accomplishment for a young man. You must be, what, 25, 26? 27 next month, madam. And do you plan to remain at the Triple R indefinitely? Margaret's tone was casual, but Charlotte recognized the probing nature of her aunt's questions. For now, Nathan replied. Though I've been putting aside money these past few years, hope to have my own place someday. Nothing as grand as the Triple R, but enough land to run some cattle, maybe breed horses. Charlotte found herself unexpectedly intrigued by this glimpse of Nathan's ambitions. Philip had never spoken of the future beyond vague assurances of prosperity and comfort. Nathan's dreams, though modest, seemed solid and well considered. A worthy goal, Margaret said, her expression approving. And not so far out of reach for a young man with your work ethic, I'd imagine. Nathan's gaze flickered to Charlotte. That's my hope, madam. After dinner, Charlotte found herself walking Nathan to the door while Aunt Margaret insisted on clearing the dishes alone. On the porch, with the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard, Nathan turned to face her. "Thank you for today, Charlotte," he said quietly, mindful that they were still within earshot of the house. "I know it's not been easy for you, facing the town after what happened." Charlotte nodded, surprised to find that she felt more peace than pain when thinking of her abandoned wedding. "It was difficult," she acknowledged, "but perhaps not as terrible as I feared." Nathan studied her face for a moment. "Would it be too forward to ask if I might call on you again? Perhaps next Sunday?" Charlotte considered the question. A week ago, the idea of entertaining another suitor would have seemed impossible, disrespectful to her broken engagement. But Nathan wasn't Philip, and his interest seemed genuine in a way that made her curious rather than cautious. "I think I'd like that," she said finally. "Though perhaps we might meet somewhere other than church. I'm not sure I'm ready to face quite so many curious eyes again so soon." Nathan nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Of course. Would you be free Saturday afternoon, perhaps? We could meet at the creek again if that suits you." "Yes, that would be lovely. Say 2 o'clock. I'll be there." Nathan placed his hat on his head, tipping it slightly. "Until Saturday, then." Charlotte watched him walk to where Rusty was tied at the front gate, mount up and ride away. As his figure receded into the distance, she found herself smiling, a small, private expression that had nothing to do with politeness and everything to do with the unexpected warmth that had bloomed in her chest during their time together. Inside, Aunt Margaret was waiting with a knowing look. "A good man," she said simply, "and one who sees your worth clearly." Charlotte didn't argue, but as she helped her aunt with the remaining dishes, she found herself wondering what exactly Nathan Xavier saw when he looked at her, and why it made her feel both nervous and exhilarated in equal measure. The week passed in a blur of routine tasks at the millinery and quiet evenings at home. Charlotte found her thoughts drifting to Nathan more often than she cared to admit, remembering the easy way he'd spoken with her aunt, the genuine interest he'd shown in her opinions, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled. By Saturday morning, Charlotte was both eager and nervous about their meeting. She chose her clothes with care, a simple but flattering dress in a soft green that she knew complemented her auburn hair, with a light shawl in case the breeze picked up. "You look lovely," Aunt Margaret said as Charlotte prepared to leave. "Will you be back for supper?" "Yes, of course. We're just meeting for a short walk." Margaret's knowing smile suggested she didn't quite believe that was all there was to it, but she merely nodded. "Enjoy yourself, dear. You deserve some happiness after everything." Charlotte made her way to the creek, taking the path that wound behind the main street to avoid as many curious eyes as possible. When she reached the spot where they'd sat the previous Sunday, Nathan was already there, seated on the same flat rock, tossing pebbles into the water. He stood when he saw her approaching, and Charlotte was struck again by how different he looked from most men in Promise Creek. Where others tried to affect the sophisticated styles of eastern cities, Nathan's appearance was authentically Western practical clothes worn with an unself-conscious ease, his body lean and strong from physical labor, rather than tailored suits designed to create an illusion of strength. "Charlotte," he said, smiling as she drew near, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Why would you think that?" she asked, genuinely curious. Nathan shrugged. "Thought you might have had second thoughts. It's still soon after being left at the altar." Charlotte finished for him, finding it easier to say the words than she expected. "Yes, it is. But I find I'm enjoying your company, and I see no reason to deny myself that small pleasure because of Philip's actions." Nathan's smile widened. "I'm glad to hear it." He offered his arm, and they began walking along the creek bank, following a narrow path that led away from town toward a small stand of cottonwoods that provided welcome shade from the afternoon sun. "How was your week?" Nathan asked as they walked. "Quiet, thankfully." "The town seems to be finding new subjects for gossip, which is a relief." Charlotte glanced up at him. "And yours?" "Busy. Spring roundup is coming and there's much to prepare." He helped her over a fallen log in the path. "But good. I enjoy the work." They reached the cottonwood grove and found a comfortable spot to sit on a sun-dappled bank where wildflowers grew in scattered patches. Charlotte arranged her skirts carefully, conscious of Nathan's gaze but not uncomfortable under it. "May I ask you something?" she said after a moment. "Of course. What made you come to the church that day?" Truly, Nathan considered her question, his expression thoughtful. "Honestly, I heard about what happened from one of the hands who'd been in town that morning. He mentioned seeing Westwood boarding the stage, all dressed up like he was heading to his own wedding, except he was going the wrong direction." Nathan paused. "I knew you were supposed to be getting married that day. I'd seen the announcement in the territorial paper, and I couldn't bear the thought of you standing there alone, facing all those people." Charlotte felt a lump form in her throat at his simple honesty. "That's very kind, but it doesn't explain why you would care what happened to me. We barely knew each other." Nathan's eyes met hers, direct and sincere. "Sometimes you don't need to know someone well to care about their welfare, Charlotte. Sometimes you just see something in them that matters." "And what did you see in me?" "Goodness," he said simply. "And strength, though I don't think you realize how much of it you have." Charlotte looked down at her hands, unexpectedly moved by his words. "I don't feel very strong most of the time. Yet here you are, a week after being publicly humiliated, walking with a man you barely know, head held high." Nathan's voice was soft. "If that's not strength, I don't know what is." Charlotte felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "Perhaps it's just foolishness." "No," Nathan said firmly, "it's courage." They fell silent for a moment, listening to the gentle rush of the creek and the rustling of leaves overhead. Charlotte found herself studying Nathan's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the small scar near his right temple that she hadn't noticed before. "How did you get that scar?" she asked, gesturing to the mark. Nathan's hand went to it automatically. "This, during the war, not from battle though, got thrown from a horse during a training exercise." He smiled ruefully. "Not very heroic." "Were you in many battles?" Nathan's expression grew distant. "Enough. Mostly in Tennessee and Georgia toward the end." "I don't like to talk about it much." Charlotte nodded, understanding his reticence. Many veterans kept their war experiences private. I'm sorry if I brought up painful memories. No need to apologize. It's natural to be curious. Nathan picked up a small stone and turned it over in his palm. What about you? Have you always wanted to work with hats and ribbons? Charlotte smiled at his obvious attempt to change the subject. Not exactly. I enjoyed sewing as a girl, but after my parents died, it became a necessity rather than a pastime. Aunt Margaret knew Mrs. Bishop from years back, and she needed help in the shop when we arrived in Promise Creek. You're good at it, Nathan observed. I've seen the displays in the window change, always eye-catching. Charlotte felt oddly pleased that he'd noticed such a small detail. Thank you. I enjoy the creative aspects, even if some of the customers can be challenging. Nathan chuckled, a warm sound that made Charlotte smile in response. I can imagine Mrs. Hollister is particular about her feathers. You have no idea, Charlotte laughed. Last month she returned a hat 3 times because the ostrich plume wasn't curled exactly right. Their conversation flowed easily after that, covering topics from favorite books. Charlotte loved novels, while Nathan preferred histories and accounts of exploration, to childhood memories. Charlotte found herself laughing more than she had in months, possibly years. There was something refreshingly honest about Nathan's perspectives, a lack of pretense that made her feel comfortable being equally genuine. As the afternoon waned, Charlotte reluctantly noted the position of the sun. I should be getting back. Aunt Margaret will be waiting. Nathan nodded, rising and offering his hand to help her up. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through Charlotte's arm, and she found herself reluctant to let go once she was standing. May I walk you home? Nathan asked. Charlotte hesitated. Walking together along the creek was one thing, but being seen returning to town together would fuel fresh gossip, and yet she found she didn't care as much as she might have a week ago. Yes, she decided. I'd like that. They walked back toward town, their conversation continuing comfortably. As they neared the outskirts of Promise Creek, Charlotte noticed Nathan slowing his pace slightly. Charlotte, he said, his tone more serious than it had been. I've enjoyed today very much. So have I, she admitted. I'd like to continue seeing you if you're willing. Nathan stopped walking, turning to face her. I know it's soon after Westwood, and I don't want to rush you or cause you any more gossip than you've already endured, but I want to be clear about my intentions. Charlotte felt her heart quicken. And what are your intentions, Nathan? Honorable ones, he said simply. I find myself thinking about you more than is probably wise. I'd like to court you properly in time if you'd be open to that possibility. The directness of his statement took Charlotte's breath away. There was no artifice in his words, no calculated charm designed to flatter or impress, just honest feeling offered without expectation. I don't know what to say, Charlotte admitted. A week ago I thought I knew what my future held. Now everything is uncertain. Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. I'm not asking for an answer today. Just wanted you to know where I stand. I'm a patient man, Charlotte. Charlotte studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive, but found only sincerity. Thank you for your honesty, she said finally. I can't make any promises right now, but I would like to continue seeing you. Perhaps we can simply spend time together and see where it leads. Nathan's smile was warm enough to chase away the evening chill that had begun to settle. I'd like that very much. As they resumed walking toward town, Charlotte was aware of curious glances from people they passed. She kept her head high, her hand resting lightly on Nathan's arm. Let them talk, she thought. For the first time since the disaster at the church, she felt something like hope stirring in her heart. The weeks that followed brought a gradual but unmistakable shift in Charlotte's life. Nathan called on her regularly, sometimes at Aunt Margaret's house, for Sunday dinner. sometimes for walks along the creek or picnics in the cottonwood grove. Each meeting deepened Charlotte's understanding of the quiet cowboy who had appeared in her life at its darkest moment. She learned that beneath his reserved exterior lay a thoughtful mind and a kind heart. He spoke knowledgeably about cattle breeding and horse training, but he could also discuss the latest news from back east or debate the merits of different authors. He listened when she spoke, really listened, in a way that made Charlotte feel truly heard, perhaps for the first time in her life. The town gossips had, of course, taken notice. Mrs. Bishop could barely contain her excitement at Charlotte's romantic rescue, as she called it, and often found excuses to mention Nathan when Charlotte was working in the shop. "Mr. Xavier was in the general store yesterday," she would say casually. "Bought a new shirt, Mrs. Patterson told me. Navy blue. Would look very fine with his coloring, don't you think?" Charlotte would smile and change the subject, unwilling to fuel the gossip mill but secretly pleased to hear any mention of Nathan when they were apart. By mid-July, nearly 2 months after her abandoned wedding, Charlotte realized with a start that she had gone an entire day without thinking of Philip. The realization came as she was closing up the millinery shop, watching through the window as Nathan rode into town on Rusty, presumably to collect supplies from the general store. The sight of him sent a warmth through her that was becoming familiar, but no less thrilling for its familiarity. That evening, as she and Aunt Margaret prepared supper, Charlotte found herself humming softly. "You seem happy," Margaret observed, a knowing smile playing at her lips. Charlotte paused in chopping carrots. "I am," she admitted, somewhat surprised by the truth of it. "I didn't expect to feel this way again, especially not so soon." "Nathan Xavier is a good man," Margaret said simply. "Better than Westwood ever was, in my opinion." Charlotte couldn't disagree. The more time she spent with Nathan, the more she recognized how superficial her relationship with Philip had been. Where Philip had charmed with practiced compliments and grand gestures, Nathan showed his regard through consistent actions and genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings. "He mentioned yesterday that he's been invited to the Founders' Day dance," Charlotte said, resuming her chopping. "He asked if I would accompany him." The Founders' Day celebration was Promise Creek's most significant annual event, commemorating the establishment of the town. The dance that concluded the festivities was always well attended, with people coming from surrounding ranches and even neighboring towns to participate. "And will you?" Margaret asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Charlotte nodded. "I think so, yes." "It will be your first formal appearance together in town," Margaret noted. "People will talk." "People always talk," Charlotte replied, echoing Nathan's words from that first day. "I find I don't mind so much anymore." The night of the Founders' Day dance arrived warm and clear, with stars speckling the sky above Promise Creek. The town hall had been transformed with bunting and lanterns, and a small band of local musicians was setting up on a raised platform at one end of the room. Charlotte had spent more time than she cared to admit preparing for the evening. She wore a dress of soft blue silk that had originally been intended for her honeymoon journey, a fact she deliberately pushed from her mind. Her hair was arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck, with a few curled tendrils framing her face. When Nathan arrived at Aunt Margaret's house to collect her, his reaction made all her efforts worthwhile. He stood speechless for a moment when she opened the door, his eyes taking in her appearance with an admiration that brought color to her cheeks. "Charlotte," he said finally, "you look beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, pleased by his obvious appreciation. "You look very handsome yourself." And he did. Nathan had clearly made an effort for the occasion, wearing a new suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard to a clean line along his jaw. He looked every inch the successful ranch foreman he was, with a quiet dignity that set him apart from the flashier young men in town. They walked to the town hall together, Charlotte's hand resting on Nathan's arm. The streets were filled with people heading to the dance, and Charlotte was acutely aware of the curious glances and whispered comments that followed their progress. But where once such attention would have made her shrink with embarrassment, now she held her head high, almost proud to be seen with Nathan. Inside the hall, the celebration was already underway. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the assembled townsfolk, and the air buzzed with conversation and laughter. Charlotte spotted several familiar faces: Mrs. Bishop holding court among a group of ladies near the punch table, Pastor Miller speaking with the town mayor, and various customers from the millinery shop scattered throughout the crowd. "Would you like some punch?" Nathan asked, his hand warm at the small of her back. "Yes, please," Charlotte replied, grateful for his steady presence beside her. As Nathan moved toward the refreshment table, Charlotte found herself approached by Mrs. Hollister and her daughter, Amelia. "Charlotte, dear Mrs. Hollister exclaimed, her eyes darting toward Nathan's retreating figure. "How lovely to see you, and with Mr. Xavier, I notice. My, how quickly things change." There was a subtle barb in her words that Charlotte chose to ignore. "Good evening, Mrs. Hollister, Miss Hollister." "Yes, Mr. Xavier was kind enough to escort me this evening." Amelia, who had once been friendly but had distanced herself after Charlotte's wedding disaster, spoke up with a hint of the same catness as her mother. "It's so brave of you to attend, Charlotte, after everything." "I don't know that I could have shown my face again so soon," Charlotte smiled, refusing to rise to the bait. "Life continues, Amelia, and I've found there's much to enjoy when one looks forward rather than back." Before either Hollister could respond, Nathan returned with 2 cups of punch, nodding politely to the women. "Mrs. Hollister, Miss Hollister, good evening." "Mr. Xavier," Mrs. Hollister replied, her tone considerably warmer. "Such a pleasure to see you at our little gathering. We don't often have the privilege of your company at town events." "The Triple R keeps me busy, madam," Nathan replied, handing Charlotte her punch. "But some occasions are worth making time for." The way his gaze lingered on Charlotte as he spoke made her cheeks warm and clearly did not go unnoticed by the Hollisters, whose expressions tightened with poorly concealed envy. "Well, we mustn't monopolize your time," Mrs. Hollister said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Come, Amelia, I believe Judge Patterson was hoping to speak with you." As they moved away, Charlotte took a sip of punch to hide her smile. "That was rather pointed," she murmured. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "The Hollisters. They've always struck me as people who measure their worth by who they know and what they own." "A fair assessment," Charlotte agreed. "Amelia was friendly when she thought I was marrying Philip. Her interest cooled considerably afterward." "Then she's a fool," Nathan said simply, "and blind to what truly matters." The band struck up a lively tune and couples began to form on the dance floor. Nathan set down his punch and turned to Charlotte. "Would you care to dance, Miss Vaughn?" The formal address, used in public, brought a smile to Charlotte's lips. "I would be delighted, Mr. Xavier." Nathan led her onto the floor, and Charlotte was pleasantly surprised to discover he was a capable dancer. Not as polished as some, perhaps, but he moved with the same natural grace he showed on horseback, leading her confidently through the steps of the waltz. "You dance well," she commented as they moved among the other couples. "My mother insisted all her boys learn," Nathan explained. "Said a man who could dance would never lack for female company." Charlotte laughed. "A wise woman, your mother." "She was," Nathan agreed, a flash of sadness crossing his features before his smile returned. "She would have liked you, I think. She valued honesty and kindness above all else." As they continued to dance, Charlotte became aware that they were drawing attention. Some glances were merely curious, while others held varying degrees of speculation or approval. She caught sight of Aunt Margaret watching from the side of the room, looking pleased. When the music ended, Nathan led Charlotte to a quieter corner of the hall where they could catch their breath. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked. "Very much," Charlotte replied honestly. "More than I expected to." "Good." Nathan's expression grew more serious. "Charlotte, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. I've been offered a new position." Charlotte felt her heart sink. "You're leaving Promise Creek?" "No," Nathan quickly assured her. "Nothing like that. Mr. Rutherford is expanding the ranch, buying the old Morrison property to the north. He's asked me to oversee it, essentially running it as a separate operation under the Triple R name." "Nathan, that's wonderful," Charlotte exclaimed, genuinely pleased for him. "It's a significant promotion." "It is," he agreed. "And it comes with something else, a house. The old Morrison place needs work, but it's solid. Too big for one person, really." There was something in his tone that made Charlotte's pulse quicken. "That sounds like an excellent opportunity." Nathan's eyes held her steadily. "It is. It also means I'll be able to put more aside toward my own place someday. I've been saving these past years, and with the increased wages—" "Your dream seems closer than ever," Charlotte observed, trying to understand what he was trying to tell her. Before Nathan could respond, they were interrupted by the mayor calling for everyone's attention. The band fell silent, and the crowd turned toward the raised platform where Mayor Simmons stood beaming. "Friends and neighbors," he began, "welcome to our 23rd annual Founders' Day celebration. It does my heart good to see so many familiar faces, along with some new ones, gathered to honor the pioneers who established our fine community." As the mayor launched into his customary speech about Promise Creek's history, Charlotte found herself distracted by Nathan's nearness and the unfinished conversation between them. What had he been about to say regarding his improved circumstances? The speech concluded with enthusiastic applause, followed by the announcement of the winners of various competitions held earlier in the day. As the formalities wound down, the band struck up another tune and couples once again filled the dance floor. "Shall we?" Nathan asked, offering his hand. Charlotte took it without hesitation, and they rejoined the dancers. As they moved together through the steps of a slower waltz, Charlotte found herself studying Nathan's face, wondering at the thoughts behind his contemplative expression. "You were saying something about your new position," she prompted gently. Nathan nodded, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Charlotte, I know it may still seem soon to you, given everything that's happened. But these past months have shown me what I want for my future more clearly than ever before." Charlotte felt her heart begin to race, sensing the direction of his words. "And what is that?" Nathan guided her through a turn before answering. "A life that includes you if you'll have me." Though she had begun to suspect his feelings, hearing them expressed so plainly still sent a rush of emotion through her. "Nathan, I'm not asking for an immediate answer," he clarified quickly. "I know your trust was badly shaken by Westwood. I just want you to know that my intentions are serious, and when you're ready, if you're ready, I hope you'll consider a future together." Charlotte gazed up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the quiet strength that had drawn her to him from the beginning. In the months since her abandoned wedding, she had come to know Nathan Xavier in a way she realized she had never truly known Philip. Where Philip had been all surface charm and grand promises, Nathan was substance and steady commitment. "I'm not afraid of the future anymore," Charlotte said softly. "Not when I consider it with you." The hope that dawned in Nathan's eyes made her heart swell. "Does that mean—" "It means," Charlotte said carefully, "that I would like very much to continue this conversation, perhaps somewhere less crowded." Nathan nodded, understanding her meaning. As the dance ended, he led her toward the doors that opened onto the small porch at the back of the town hall. The night air was cool and refreshing after the warmth of the crowded room, and stars glittered overhead in a velvet sky. They stood side by side at the porch railing, the sounds of music and laughter muted behind them. For a moment, neither spoke, content in the shared silence. "I never thanked you properly," Charlotte said finally. "For what? For coming to the church that day, for offering me a way out with my dignity intact." She turned to face him. "It was the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me." Nathan shook his head slightly. "You don't need to thank me for basic decency, Charlotte." "But I do," she insisted. "Because that day changed everything for me. Not just because you rescued me from humiliation, but because you showed me what real consideration looks like." She paused, gathering her thoughts. With Philip, everything was always a performance, grand gestures designed to impress, promises made for effect. But with you? "With me," Nathan prompted when she hesitated. "With you, it's real," Charlotte said simply. "Every word, every action." "You're the most honest person I've ever known, Nathan Xavier." Nathan's expression softened, and he reached out to take her hand. "Charlotte, I can't promise you wealth or social standing. The life of a rancher's wife isn't easy. But I can promise you this. I will never leave you waiting at any altar. When I make a vow, I keep it." The reference to her abandoned wedding might have stung once, but now Charlotte found only certainty in her heart. "I believe you," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions welling within her. "And I would rather have honest work and genuine love than all the wealth in the world with someone I can't trust." Nathan's eyes widened slightly at her implied acceptance. "Are you saying—" Charlotte smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. "I'm saying that I care for you deeply, Nathan. That these past months have shown me what truly matters in a partner, and that if you're patient a little longer, I believe my heart will be ready for whatever future we might build together." Nathan's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. With exquisite gentleness, he raised her hand to his lips. "I would wait as long as necessary for you, Charlotte Vaughn." In that moment, with the stars shining above and the distant sounds of celebration behind them, Charlotte knew with absolute certainty that she would never again be left waiting by a man who didn't value her worth. Nathan Xavier might not offer the social standing or wealth that Philip Westwood had promised, but he offered something far more precious, a love as steady and true as the man himself. As the summer heat gave way to autumn's crisp embrace, Charlotte and Nathan's courtship continued to flourish. They settled into a comfortable rhythm Sunday dinners at Aunt Margaret's house, afternoon walks when Nathan could get away from the ranch, occasional evenings at community gatherings where they were increasingly seen as an established couple. Nathan's new position at the Morrison property kept him busier than before, but he made time to ride into town at least once a week to see Charlotte. Sometimes, he would arrive at the millinery shop just before closing, waiting patiently while she completed her tasks, then walking her home with her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. On one such evening in early October, as they strolled along the twilight streets of Promise Creek, Nathan mentioned that the renovations to the Morrison house were nearly complete. Mr. Rutherford hired some men from Tucson to help with the roof and major repairs, he explained. "The rest I've been doing myself in the evenings. It's coming along nicely." "I'd love to see it sometime," Charlotte said, genuinely curious about the place he'd described so often. Nathan's expression brightened. "Would you? Perhaps this Sunday after church. It's about an hour's ride from town. I could bring the buggy instead of Rusty, make it more comfortable." "I'd like that very much," Charlotte replied, pleased by his obvious enthusiasm. "I'll pack a picnic." Sunday dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for an outing. After church services, Nathan brought the promised buggy around to Aunt Margaret's house, where Charlotte waited with a basket filled with fried chicken, biscuits, and apple pie. "You're looking very handsome today, Mr. Xavier," Aunt Margaret observed as Nathan helped load the picnic basket into the buggy. He did indeed look particularly fine in a crisp white shirt and dark vest, his hair freshly trimmed. "Thank you, Mrs. Vaughn," Nathan replied with a smile. "Special occasion deserves a bit more effort." Charlotte caught the meaningful glance that passed between them but chose not to comment. She'd noticed Nathan and her aunt in several private conversations lately, and though she was curious, she trusted them both enough not to pry. The ride to the Morrison property was pleasant, the road winding through golden cottonwoods and across rolling grasslands where cattle grazed peacefully. Nathan pointed out landmarks as they traveled a distinctive rock formation, a creek that ran strong even in the driest seasons, a stand of pine trees that marked the boundary between the Triple Artique's original land and the new acquisition. "There it is," he said finally, gesturing toward a rise ahead where a house stood silhouetted against the sky. The Morrison place. As they drew closer, Charlotte could see it was a substantial structure larger than she'd imagined from Nathan's descriptions. A two-story farmhouse built of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front and one side. Fresh paint gleamed white in the midday sun, and new glass sparkled in the windows. "Nathan, it's beautiful," Charlotte exclaimed as they pulled up in front of the house. "You described it as needing work, but it looks perfect." Nathan's expression was a mixture of pride and nervousness as he helped her down from the buggy. "I may have understated the progress, wanted it to be a surprise." He led her up the steps to the porch, where two rocking chairs faced the spectacular view of mountains in the distance. The front door was new, Charlotte noticed, the wood rich and well-oiled. "Would you like to see inside?" Nathan asked, a hint of tension in his voice that Charlotte found endearing. "Of course." Nathan opened the door and stepped back to allow Charlotte to enter first. The interior was bright and airy, with large windows letting in abundant light. The main room was simply but tastefully furnished with a solid oak table and chairs, a comfortable-looking sofa, and bookshelves built into one wall. A stone fireplace dominated the far end of the room, and Charlotte could imagine how cozy it would be on winter evenings. "This is the main living area," Nathan explained, watching her reaction carefully. "Kitchen's through there, with a new stove Mr. Rutherford let me bring over from Tucson. There's a small study off to the side, and upstairs are 3 bedrooms." Charlotte moved through the space, admiring the craftsmanship evident in the renovations. "Nathan, this is wonderful. You've done an amazing job." "Thank you," he said, visibly relaxing at her approval. "It still needs a woman's touch, of course, curtains and such." There was something in his tone that made Charlotte turn to look at him more closely. Nathan stood in the center of the room, hat in hand, an expression on his face that she hadn't seen before, vulnerable yet determined. "Nathan, is everything all right?" He took a deep breath, then reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small box. Charlotte's heart began to race as she realized what was happening. "Charlotte," Nathan began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "When I found you at that church 4 months ago, I had no idea how completely my life was about to change. I just knew I couldn't bear to see you hurting." He stepped closer, the small box held carefully in his strong hands. "These months with you have been the happiest of my life." "You're the strongest," kindest, most genuine person I've ever known. And each day I spend with you makes me more certain of what I want for my future." Charlotte felt tears welling in her eyes as Nathan slowly knelt before her, opening the box to reveal a simple but beautiful gold ring set with a small, perfect diamond that caught the sunlight streaming through the windows. "Charlotte Vaughn, I love you with my whole heart. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The words hung in the air between them, sincere and full of promise. Charlotte looked at the man kneeling before her, so different from the one who had failed to appear at the church that June day. Where Philip had offered charm and status, Nathan offered steadfast love and unwavering commitment. There was no doubt in her mind which was the greater treasure. "Yes," she whispered, her voice catching on the word. "Yes, Nathan, I will marry you." Joy blazed across Nathan's face as he stood and gently slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant to be there. "I love you," Charlotte said, the words coming easily now. "I think perhaps I began falling in love with you that very first day, when you offered me your coat and your kindness." Nathan's hands framed her face with exquisite tenderness. "May I kiss you, Charlotte, please?" she whispered. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise sealed with the softest touch of lips. When they parted, Charlotte saw in Nathan's eyes all the love and commitment she had once thought lost to her forever. "Welcome home, Charlotte," he said softly, gesturing to the house around them. "If you like it, that is. We could make changes or even look for somewhere else eventually." Charlotte laughed, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "It's perfect, Nathan. Absolutely perfect." They spent the afternoon exploring the house and grounds, sharing the picnic on the porch as Nathan explained his plans for the property, the vegetables he hoped to grow in the kitchen garden, the small orchard he wanted to plant, the improvements he envisioned for the barn and corrals. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, they reluctantly prepared to return to town. Nathan helped Charlotte into the buggy, then paused, gazing up at the house. "When would you like to be married?" he asked, joining her on the seat and taking up the reins. "Spring might be nice when the wildflowers are blooming." Charlotte considered the question, remembering the elaborate plans and lengthy engagement she'd had with Philip. This time, she wanted something different, something as straightforward and genuine as the man beside her. "I don't want to wait until spring," she decided. "Perhaps before Christmas. That would give us time to prepare without unnecessary delay." Nathan's smile was answer enough. "December it is." "A small ceremony." "Yes," Charlotte agreed. "Just family and close friends. In the church, though." She paused, then added with determination, "I want to stand in that same church where I was left waiting and make new memories to replace the old ones." Nathan reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Then that's what we'll do. And Charlotte," his eyes held hers, steady and sure, "I promise you won't be waiting alone this time." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Promise Creek. Most reactions were positive. Pastor Miller offered heartfelt congratulations. Mrs. Bishop practically swooned with romantic delight, and Aunt Margaret couldn't stop smiling. A few, like the Hollisters, expressed thinly veiled surprise at Charlotte's choice of a mere ranch foreman after having been engaged to one of the town's leading businessmen. But such comments rolled off Charlotte like water from a duck's back. She knew what she had found with Nathan was worth more than all the status Philip Westwood could have provided. She knew it in the way Nathan listened when she spoke, in the care he took to make time for her despite his demanding work, in the plans they made together for their shared future. The wedding was set for the second Saturday in December. Charlotte chose a dress of deep ivory wool with simple lines and elegant details, a stark contrast to the elaborate gown she'd worn for her failed wedding to Philip. This time, everything would be different. This time, she was marrying a man who had proven his character through actions rather than words. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, an unexpected letter arrived from Tucson. Charlotte recognized Philip's handwriting immediately and felt a momentary flutter of anxiety as she broke the seal. "Dear Charlotte," it read, "I understand you are to be married soon, and while I have no right to comment on your happiness, I feel I owe you the explanation I should have provided months ago. The truth is that I left Promise Creek not out of any lack of affection for you, but because my financial circumstances had become untenable. The business was failing, and I had accumulated substantial debts that I concealed from everyone, including you. The future I had promised you was built on shifting sand, and on the morning of our wedding, I realized I could not in good conscience bind you to a man on the verge of ruin. My cowardice in how I handled the situation is inexcusable. I should have spoken with you directly rather than fleeing like a thief in the night. For that, I am truly sorry. I have established myself in Tucson now, working for my cousin's import business. My circumstances are much reduced from what you knew in Promise Creek, but I am slowly rebuilding. I wish you every happiness in your marriage. By all accounts, Mr. Xavier is a man of integrity and industry qualities I aspired to, but failed to embody. With sincere apologies and good wishes, Philip Westwood. Charlotte sat for a long time after reading the letter, emotions washing through her in waves. There was hurt, still, at the memory of that awful day, but also a surprising sense of closure. Philip's explanation, late though it was, helped her understand his actions in a way that diminished their power to wound her. When Nathan called that evening, she showed him the letter without hesitation. He read it carefully, his expression thoughtful. "Are you all right?" he asked when he finished, returning the paper to her. Charlotte nodded, touched by his concern. "Yes, actually, I'm glad to know the truth, even if it came late, and in a strange way I'm grateful." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Grateful?" Charlotte smiled, taking his hand. "If Philip hadn't left me at the church that day, I wouldn't be here now, planning a wedding to the man I truly love. Sometimes what seems like our worst moment can lead us to our best future." Nathan's expression softened, and he raised her hand to his lips. "I'm the grateful one, Charlotte." Every day. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with a light dusting of early snow giving Promise Creek a festive appearance. In Aunt Margaret's house, Charlotte dressed with calm deliberation, her mind at peace in a way it hadn't been before her previous attempt at marriage. Her dress fit perfectly, the ivory wool warm against the December chill. She wore her mother's pearl hairpin, the one Nathan had returned to her, securing a simpler veil than the elaborate lace creation she'd worn in June. "You look beautiful, my dear," Aunt Margaret said, fastening a strand of pearls around Charlotte's neck, her wedding gift. "And more importantly, you look happy." "I am happy," Charlotte confirmed, meeting her aunt's gaze in the mirror. "Completely, wholly happy." Margaret squeezed her shoulders gently. "Your parents would be so proud of the woman you've become, Charlotte, and they would adore Nathan." Charlotte felt tears threatening and blinked them away. "Thank you, Aunt Margaret, for everything. For taking me in after they died, for bringing me to Promise Creek, for supporting me through all of this." "It has been my joy to watch you grow and find your way," Margaret replied, her own eyes suspiciously bright. "Now shall we go? Your groom will be waiting." Charlotte nodded, gathering her bouquet of winter greenery and dried wildflowers. "Yes, and this time I know with absolute certainty that he'll be there." The church was decorated simply but beautifully with pine boughs and red berries. As Charlotte stood at the back, ready to walk down the same aisle where she had once stood abandoned. She felt no fear, no doubt, only a profound sense of rightness. The small gathering of friends and neighbors turned as the music began, but Charlotte had eyes only for Nathan, waiting for her at the altar. His face, when he saw her, held such naked adoration that it brought fresh tears to her eyes, happy ones this time. Each step down the aisle felt like coming home. When she reached Nathan and placed her hand in his, the warmth and strength of his grip banished the last ghostly memory of standing alone in this same spot months before. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Miller began, his kind face beaming at the couple before him. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Nathan Xavier and Charlotte Vaughn in holy matrimony." The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the traditional vows spoken with quiet conviction by both bride and groom. When Nathan slipped the gold band onto Charlotte's finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady and sure, his eyes never leaving hers. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Miller declared, his voice ringing with genuine pleasure. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Xavier." Nathan's kiss was gentle but held a promise of deeper passion to come. When they turned to face their guests as husband and wife, the applause that greeted them seemed to chase away the last shadows of Charlotte's past disappointment. The reception was held at the town hall, transformed once again with decorations and tables laden with food contributed by friends and neighbors. Charlotte and Nathan moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes with genuine gratitude. "Mrs. Xavier," Nathan murmured when they finally had a moment alone, testing the sound of her new name. "Do you know how happy you've made me today?" Charlotte smiled up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such joy. "If it's half as happy as you've made me, then yes, I think I do." As evening fell, they said their goodbyes and departed in Nathan's buggy, now decorated with ribbons and a hand lettered "Just Married" sign courtesy of some of the Triple R hands. They rode through the gathering darkness toward the Morrison house, their house, now where they would begin their life together. Charlotte leaned against Nathan's shoulder, contentment washing through her as she watched the familiar landmarks pass. When the house came into view, warm light glowing from the windows, she felt a surge of emotion at the sight of their home waiting to welcome them. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier," Nathan said softly as he helped her down from the buggy. Before Charlotte could respond, he swept her into his arms, carrying her up the steps and across the threshold in the time-honored tradition. She laughed with delight, her arms around his neck, her heart so full of love for this man who had appeared in her darkest hour and brought light back into her world. Inside, a fire crackled welcomingly in the hearth, and Charlotte saw that someone, likely Aunt Margaret, and some of the ranch hands had prepared the house for their arrival. Fresh flowers stood on the table despite the winter season, and a small wedding supper waited beneath covered dishes. Nathan set Charlotte gently on her feet but kept his arms around her. "Happy?" he asked, searching her face. "More than I ever thought possible," Charlotte replied honestly. "6 months ago I thought my life was over. Now I know it was just beginning." Nathan's hand came up to caress her cheek. "I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of your love, Charlotte. That's my promise to you." "You already are," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, sealing their new beginning with a promise of her own to love this good, honorable man with every breath she took for all the days they would share. 5 years later, Charlotte stood on the porch of their home, watching as a buggy approached along the road from Promise Creek. Her hand rested protectively on her swollen belly, where their third child grew steadily beneath her heart. Inside the house, She could hear Nathan reading a story to their two children, 4-year-old Margaret and 2-year-old James, his deep voice rising and falling with the drama of the tale. The sound brought a smile to Charlotte's lips, as it always did. The years since their wedding had brought challenges, as all lives do, but also immeasurable joy. Nathan had continued to excel in his position, eventually purchasing a small parcel of land adjoining the Morrison property from Mr. Rutherford. Their home had expanded with their family, with Nathan adding rooms as they were needed. Charlotte had continued at the millinery until Margaret's birth, then had found unexpected fulfillment in creating her own designs at home, which Mrs. Bishop still sold in the shop. Her reputation for quality work had spread beyond Promise Creek, bringing orders from as far away as Tucson and even Phoenix. The buggy drew closer, and Charlotte recognized Aunt Margaret, who still lived in her house in town but visited often. Beside her sat a stranger, a man whose profile struck Charlotte as oddly familiar. As the buggy stopped in front of the house, Nathan emerged with the children, alerted by the sound of approaching wheels. He came to stand beside Charlotte, his arm slipping naturally around her waist. "Aunt Margaret's early this week," he observed, "and she's brought a guest." Charlotte nodded, curious about the stranger who was now helping Margaret down from the buggy with careful respect. There was something in the set of his shoulders, the way he moved, that nagged at her memory. "Charlotte, Nathan," Margaret called as she approached the porch. "I hope you don't mind the unexpected visit. There's someone here who's very eager to meet you." The stranger removed his hat as he climbed the steps, revealing features that answered Charlotte's unspoken question. He was older, his face weathered by sun and time, but the resemblance to Nathan was unmistakable. "Daniel," Nathan's voice was barely above a whisper, his body tensing beside Charlotte. The man nodded, his eyes the same striking blue as Nathan's, filling with emotion. "Hello, Nate." "It's been a long time." 15 years, Nathan confirmed, his voice thick. "I searched for you." "I know," Daniel Xavier replied. "I heard about it later when I finally settled in one place long enough. I've been trying to find you for the past year." He glanced at Aunt Margaret. "Your aunt-in-law found me instead when she was visiting her cousin in San Francisco. Recognized me from your description," she said. Margaret nodded, looking pleased with herself. "The Xavier blue eyes are quite distinctive." "And when he introduced himself to my cousin's neighbor as Daniel Xavier, I knew I had to bring him to you." For a moment, no one moved. Then Nathan stepped forward, pulling his brother into a fierce embrace that spoke of years of worry and wondering. Charlotte felt tears spring to her eyes at the sight, her heart full for her husband's unexpected joy. When the brothers finally separated, both wiping discreetly at their eyes, Nathan turned to Charlotte. "Daniel, this is my wife, Charlotte, and these are our children, Margaret and James." Daniel smiled, the expression transforming his face in a way that reminded Charlotte powerfully of Nathan. "Ma would have been so proud, Nate. A beautiful family, a fine home." He extended his hand to Charlotte. "Mrs. Xavier, it's an honor to meet you. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion." Charlotte took his hand warmly. "There's nothing to forgive. Your family, Mr. Xavier, you're always welcome here." Later, as they sat around the dinner table sharing stories and beginning the long process of bridging the years of separation, Charlotte found herself watching Nathan's face alight with happiness as he reconnected with his long-lost brother. His eyes met hers across the table, and in that glance was all the love and gratitude that had characterized their years together. From the ashes of her greatest humiliation had risen a life more fulfilling than she could have imagined. That day, she stood alone at the church. Nathan had offered her an escape when she needed it most, and in doing so, had led her to the happiest of destinations, a life built on love, trust, and unwavering commitment. As their family, now expanded by one more, laughed and talked around her, Charlotte placed a hand on her growing belly and offered a silent prayer of thanks for unanswered prayers and unexpected blessings. For the cowboy who had said, "You'll walk away with me," and led her to exactly where she was meant to be.